talk about, and this is a really horrific case. John Hunt, the commentator for BBC 5 Live, and he's just spoken out. I mean, it's unimaginable what he must be going through. The killings of the alleged, we've got to say, slayings of his wife and two daughters. And again, it brings into question this whole thing about crossbows. So, are they still legal in the UK? What is the law around crossbows? Because a lot of people have been asking, how is it that people can get their hands on these things? Okay. Aren't they prohibitive weapons or something like that?
Okay, so the law is one thing. It's important, I think, first of all, to consider what a crossbow is, and probably from there follows the way in which it's treated. It's not outright a weapon, although most people who would want to have it, I suspect, would use it as such, which is why we're quite so upset to think of these things being available. They're deadly. I mean, it's almost like a bullet, isn't it? The way in which the projectile, the arrow is fired. Although it's not like you can fire multiple shots easily. I think there's probably a lead-in time to be able to make to fire a second one if you miss or whatever. So probably outside a domestic context, they're very dangerous, but they're unlikely to be a multiple threat, and you have to be skilled to use one. That might be some of the reason that they're not outlawed per se. There is a crossbow legislation which says that they can't be fired in public, and when they're being transported, they have to be out of action. You can't have one loaded and ready to go. And of course, it takes at least a few seconds, doesn't it, to crank it up? I'm not aware of exactly what the terminology is. However, a crossbow can also be considered something called an offensive weapon. And we've heard about offensive weapons when we talk about knives and stuff like that on this show in the past. And whether something is an offensive weapon, especially if it's something that can be used for two things, like there are legitimately people like archers who can use crossbows. Aren't there people who do skiing? Is it triathlon or biathlon, something like that? They might use crossbows. So it kind of depends in law on the kind of context and intent of the person who's carrying it. So if somebody's carrying it in the street, and the context suggests that they might intend to do somebody harm with it, it becomes an offensive weapon. We don't have an outright ban on them being sold or used, but I think they're so shocking. Handguns weren't banned outright till Dunblane. It takes sometimes a really horrific act before something is done, and I don't know which way it's going to fall.